Good evening, everyone. My name is Susan Sparks. I am the senior pastor of Madison Avenue Baptist Church in New York City. I'm standing right here in my sanctuary in Midtown Manhattan, about 5 blocks from the Empire State Building, and I want to welcome you to Laugh Your Way to Grace. Now, I'm the senior pastor of this church, but I'm also a trial lawyer who changed careers and became a pastor and a stand-up comedian, as one does, right? And tonight, I want to bring all that I've learned in those careers together to offer you what I have learned about the healing power of humor. You know, the great theologian Karl Barth said that laughter is the closest thing to the grace of God. Now, I don't always agree with the theology of Karl, but on this point, I say amen. The theme of our biennial is imagine. You know, the idea of thinking creatively, thinking differently, which reminds me of a billboard that my husband Toby and I saw. A couple of years back, we were driving through Minneapolis, Minnesota, and by the side of the road, there was this giant billboard. At the top, it said, Minnesota Cremation Society, which is just weird, right, that they would advertise. Underneath that was a photograph of a casket, and underneath that, it said, think outside the box. I love that, right? That's what I want us to do tonight. Think outside the box, to think differently, to imagine. What if we brought laughter into all aspects of our lives and into this broken world? What a difference it would make. So to start out, let me tell you a little bit about myself so you know what you're getting into. Now, while I may be the pastor of a church in New York City, you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not from New York City. Thank the Lord. No offense to New Yorkers. I am a born and bred Southerner from Charlotte, North Carolina. But the Lord saw fit to lead me to this foreign alien land, and here I am. And I have to tell you, I've been up here 20 years, but I still feel traumatized by the difference of living in the South and living up here. I mean, everything is different. Even like food shopping is different. I mean, up here in New York, people go to these fancy sounding grocery stores with names like Zabar's. And you hear people say things like, can I serve white truffle chev with quail? Honey, you don't hear that where I grew up. I mean, last time I was down in North Carolina shopping at the Piggly Wiggly, the woman next to me said, can I serve Velveeta with fat back? Well, yes, of course you can. I mean, don't you love Velveeta? I mean, I don't even know what it is, but I love it. I mean, it's sort of like Cheese Whiz and Silly Putty all put together. I don't know. I mean, whatever it is, I mean, it is a versatile dish, you have to admit that. I mean, growing up, we would slice it and put it on Ritz crackers for like fancy party appetizers. My mom would melt it with Rotel tomatoes for that nacho dip. Did y'all do that? Yeah. We would caulk the tub with it. It's a versatile dish. You know, I miss everything. I mean, I miss that language. I miss the beautiful Southern accents. One thing I miss very much is a phrase we have down south. Because down south, you can say anything you want about anybody you want as long as you end the phrase with, bless their hearts. Now just file that away. Well, you heard me say earlier that I started out as a trial lawyer. So my early career was as a trial lawyer in Atlanta, Georgia. And I moved my practice from Atlanta, Georgia, up to New York, kind of a my cousin Vinny in reverse. And again, everything was so different. I mean, I remember my first day in the Bronx in court, and I wore what I usually wore to court in Atlanta, you know, like a little tea-length dress with lots of flowers and colors and a hat. Judge walks in and goes, counselor, or are you the maid of honor? It was so different. But you know, after about 10 years in the law, there came the point where I knew that I needed to make a change. I was sitting in my office working for a big bank. I probably shouldn't say the name of the bank. The first two syllables are city, and so I was sitting at my desk and the phone rang, and it was one of our Visa card holders somehow had come in through the legal department to my phone, and this woman proceeds to explain to me how Jesus had appeared in her living room and told her that her Visa bill had been forgiven. I was like, did he say anything about the late fees or any of that? Because I hadn't heard from him. When I hung up the phone, I had to sit there and think for a minute, and then it dawned on me, I think this was a sign, because if this guy Jesus could mediate between first century Palestine and 21st century Citibank, honey, I needed to go work for him. Which is where things got really complicated, because I knew that I had been feeling a call to the ministry for quite some time, but I just couldn't figure out how it would work. I mean, here I was, a lawyer and a stand-up. Like, how does that fit into the church? And so, like most normal people that hit a crossroads in life, I quit my job, put everything I owned in storage, jumped on a plane, and went to work for Mother Teresa. And I spent about a month in Calcutta with her, trying to kind of figure this out. How could this call to joy and humor in the church, just as a comedian, I couldn't see it. So the first day I was there, I went to work in her orphanage called Shesha Bhavan. And I remember freezing at the door because the images were so jarring. There were multiple kids per crib, and some kids were actually tied to the crib, not out of abuse, just because they didn't have enough people to watch them. They were pulling them off the street right and left. And so I took a deep breath, and I walked in, and all of a sudden I felt a tug at my leg, and I looked down, and there was this little girl about, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6. And so I didn't know what else to do, so I just plopped down on the floor. She crawled in my lap. And one of the nuns came over and she said, "This is Anna, and she's been blind and deaf since birth, but she loves to laugh." Well, that struck me as so odd and crazy that I just started laughing. And I was like, what? And the second I did, Anna put her ear right here, right next to my chest, and felt the vibrations of me laughing and then squealed with laughter herself. At which point I started laughing because she was laughing. She put her head right back here, and we went back and forth like this for what seemed hours. You know, and it was in that moment that I was like, oh, I get it. God dropped a neon sign down saying, humor and joy and hope belong in the church. You have got to go back and bring it. I mean, here's this little girl that had nothing in terms of Western standards, no family, not even really a life expectancy, and yet out of that place of pain, in a kind of dark, soundless world that she'd never been able to engage outside of, she exuded joy. I was like, I get it. Thank you. I understand. So I packed my bags, went right back, entered seminary, finished Union Seminary, found this beautiful church, continued my career as a professional stand-up, and here I am. I mean, it's a crazy path, but you know, God leads us around in circles, and you never know what blessings are going to happen and what roads open up ahead, right? Amen? Let me have it. So let me just share with you, there are two main things as a pastor and a comedian that I have learned over the years. Number one, we are children of a God with a sense of humor. Again, can I have an amen on that? Now, I could spend hours on that topic alone, but let me just offer you what I think is the best piece of evidence. I got a little Bible here. Let me share it with you. This is my favorite Bible story, and to me, this is Exhibit A, that God has a sense of humor. This is the story of when the Philistines and the Israelites went to battle. You may remember this. It's 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 9. Now, the Israelites pray to God, is it okay if we go to war? And God says, it's fine, just don't lose the Ark of the Covenant. Obviously, I'm paraphrasing. Okay, so we pick up 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 9. The Israelites lose the war. They lose the Ark of the Covenant, and the Philistines are taking the Ark of the Covenant back home. Ready? 1 Samuel chapter 5, verse 9, King James Version. This translation is the important one. And it was so that after the Philistines carried the ark about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a great destruction. And the Lord smote the men of the city, both small and great, and they had hemorrhoids in their secret parts. You cannot make this up. I'm telling you right now, 3 years of seminary and $75,000 worth of an education. This is the best thing I learned the whole time, right there. Tell me we are not children of a God with a sense of humor. Now, that's the first thing I want you to remember. The second thing I want you to remember is that laughter, in my opinion, is the most powerful tool we have in this life. Now, brothers and sisters, if you don't take anything else away from tonight, take this. You ready? If you can laugh at yourself, you can forgive yourself. And if you can forgive yourself, you can forgive others. I mean, isn't that kind of the whole point in a nutshell right there? Well, let me put it another way. My dad, Herb, don't you love that name, Herb? He always said that you need two tools in life to get through. WD-40 and, say it with me, duct tape. Of course, right? Because all of life's problems break down into one of two things. Either something moves and it shouldn't, or it doesn't move and it should. That's true for like doors, windows, relationships, whatever, right? To me, humor is the WD-40 and duct tape of life. Because humor breaks us open, sort of like WD-40, helps us see things in a fresh new way. And like duct tape, it bonds us together to help us see the commonalities first. Now let's talk about the WD-40 side of it first. WD-40 breaks us open. So does humor. When we laugh, we see things in a different way. We can, sometimes, I don't know, if you're like me, I tend to get stuck in my own perspective, kind of all about me, what I see. And I'm afraid that sometimes we get so locked down into our own worldview that we forget that there may be way more going on than we think we know. I found out about that the hard way a couple of years ago. My husband Toby and I took a cross-country Amtrak trip, which was so fabulous, from Chicago to Los Angeles. And if any of you have done it, you know it's a wonderful trip. It's just that the little rooms are kind of small. But the first day it's great. You're all excited and it's so fun. The second day, it's fun, yeah, but third day it's small and you're ready to get off. We were coming into California. This was, I believe, the morning of day 4, which we were really ready to get off. And Toby went to get us coffee. And I thought, let me fix up a little bit. I'd been kind of schlepping around. So as the good Southern woman, I had to fix my hair, put on some makeup. He comes back with the coffee and he freezes in the door and he says, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, what do you mean? And he goes, "You look so angry." It was then that I learned a very important lesson in life. Never, ever draw your eyebrows on a moving train. Just don't do it, ever. Once again, there's usually more going on than we think we know. And this is where laughter comes in, because when we can laugh at ourselves, it jars us open. Humor brings us a new perspective. Charlie Chaplin may have put it best. He said, life in the close-up is a tragedy, but life in the long shot, that's a comedy. And if we can manage to take that step back and see life with a different lens, then everything begins to shift. Part of it is that I think when we shift our perspective, we realize that our to-do list, our problems, our pain may be not as bad as we think. And when we take that step back and we jar our perspective and we laugh at ourselves just a little bit, we may not only find forgiveness for ourselves, we may realize that we are way more blessed than we know. Now, our church is right out here is Madison Avenue. These are our front doors, and we are flat front to one of the main foot travel areas of New York City. And so we put signs out front to catch people's attention, get them to come in. Some of the signs are funny, some are poignant, some are somewhere in between. One, for example, last year that I liked was, "What happens in Vegas is forgiven here." Another one that I particularly liked, and this is just a great lesson for life, it was, the lesson for life is this: eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. Isn't that great? I'm going to say it one more time. The secret to life is to eat half, walk double, laugh triple, and love without measure. One of the great signs. Of course, my all-time favorite was this sign that said, honk if you love Jesus, text while driving if you want to meet him. Love that one. But back to my point, when we laugh and get perspective, we can remember, and we should remember, that we are more blessed than we think. And one of our signs that I loved kind of reminded us of that, and it said, there are people who would love to have your bad days. Think about that. So when we laugh, we get perspective. We also get forgiveness for ourselves and for others, but sometimes we really do need to cut ourselves a break. You know, recently I went down to the Billy Graham Library in Charlotte, a beautiful place. What was interesting is that there was a many syllables. This is why improv is good in comedy. Let's start that one again. There was a memorial, worked that time, for Dr. Graham's wife, Ruth. But she had something really interesting on her tombstone. And I asked one of the docents, what is that about? And they told this story, that Billy and Ruth were out on a crusade, and coming home, they ran into some road work, and at the end of the road work was a sign. And Ruth pointed at that sign and said, I want that on my tombstone. So sure enough, years later, she dies. And here's her tombstone, her name, birth date, death date, and underneath it says, construction finished. Thank you for your patience. Isn't that great? I just love that. I mean, we are all human beings under construction, just doing the best we can. Maybe we should just cut ourselves a little break. Maybe allow ourselves to laugh at ourselves just a wee bit. I mean, in the end, I think the best advice is, of course, from Reinhold Niebuhr and the Serenity Prayer about letting go. I mean, you know this prayer. Say it with me if you remember it. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Well, there's a new one out. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called the Senility Prayer, and it goes something like this. God, grant me the senility to forget the people I didn't like anyway, the good fortune to run into the ones that I do like, and the eyesight to tell the difference. I like both of those, you know. So that is the WD-40 side of things. Let's shift gears and talk about duct tape. How does humor bond us together? Well, let's just start out with the premise that we tend to judge each other by the dumbest things that have absolutely nothing to do with us as human beings. You know, true, right? I mean, what kind of car we drive, how big is our house, you know, what clothes do we wear, you know, our weight, our skin color, and on and on. I mean, I found out about that, a few years back when Toby and I were on our big Harley Davidson. We're motorcycle riders. We were headed home from Montana, and we've been riding all day, about 500 miles. We were exhausted, and we stopped on the border of Montana and North Dakota. There were 2 little motels, and we decided, let's see, there was a Days Inn and a Sea and Sand, which is suspect in Montana, if you think about it, that name. But we decided to give it a try. So we go into the Sea and Sand, and the woman looks me up and down and goes, we're full. I'm like, really? There's no cars in the parking lot? We just want one room for one night. And she just reared back and went, we don't rent to your type. I just burst out laughing. I was like, what type might that be? Now, granted, I'll give her a little bit of cred, you know, a little cred. I mean, we look pretty sketchy. Been riding all day. I was in my biker leathers and my fake tattoos. What most ministers wear on vacation, right? Okay. Anyway, I said, what type are you talking about? And she was like, Hell's Angels, biker people. I was like, no, you got this all wrong. I'm a Baptist minister on vacation, and my husband out there is a retired federal prosecutor. She leaned over the counter and got right in my face and said, the Bible says it's wrong to lie. You know, I'm rarely speechless, but in that moment I had nothing to say. So I just sort of slithered out the door, went next door to the biker-friendly Days Inn, changed into a clean Harley t-shirt. And then I decided to visit my friend again, so I brought my business card that said Reverend Susan Sparks, Senior Pastor, Madison Avenue Baptist Church, and I walked in, I put the business card on the counter, and I said, Bible also says, judge not. Bless your heart. And I just walked out. Was that very Christian? No. But it felt so good, and it was so fun. But here's the best part. As I was walking out the door, she started laughing, and she said, well, I guess there's a little hell's angel in all of us. Well, amen to that. You know, the bottom line is we have way more in common than we may ever think. When we laugh together, I don't care if it's family, friends, a stranger like the two of us were, or enemies. Your worlds overlap for a split second because you share something in common because you're laughing at the same joke. I don't understand why we don't see that commonality. You know, recently scientists have shared that we are, human beings, genetically 99.99% the same. Think about that. We are 99.99% genetically the same, which means notwithstanding race, gender, nationality, ethnicity, religion, on and on, 0.01% is the only difference we're talking about, which means all of our infighting and wars and racism and violence is over 0.01%. Really? We just can't let go of that? I'm reminded of a story by the author Jack Kornfield, who told about two POWs. One said to the other, have you forgiven your captors yet? And the second one thought for a minute and said, no, never. And then the first one said, well, it appears they still have you in prison, don't they? We are captive to that 0.01%. We just can't seem to forgive it. But when we laugh together, that world crosses over, and that 1.01% dissolves. That's why I love so much a comedy tour that I've been on for almost 20 years now called the Laugh and Peace Tour. It started right after 9/11, and it stars me, a rabbi, and a Muslim comic. Don't you love it? We have been all over the world with this tour, and the whole point of it is very simple. We highlight what we have in common, not the differences. We build bridges with our commonalities and just tell stories. For example, Mo Amer, one of our Muslim comics, talks about being a Muslim American and flying in and out of an airport. Hello. He said, I don't understand why you all get upset that you have to be there 2 hours ahead of time. Honey, I have to be there 2 months ahead of time. Rabbi Bob talks about learning ancient Hebrew, and he decided to go to Israel after he graduated from rabbinical school. And so he was going to use his classical Hebrew with the cab driver. So he tells a cab driver in Jerusalem, please let me off here. And the cab driver burst out laughing and said, do you have any idea what you just said? And Bob said, let me off here. And the guy goes, no. What you said was, behold, here I descend. You don't need to be Jewish to understand that. These are stories, these are common human stories about travel and about language. I think the thing I love the most is the story that Bob tends to end the show with. And again, remember, this is a rabbi sharing this to show what we have in common. He tells the story of two rabbis talking. One says to the other, my son converted to Christianity. I don't know what to do. The second one said, really? My son too. What do we do? The two rabbis talked for a minute and they said, let's go to God. The two rabbis go to God and they say, both of our sons have converted to Christianity. What do we do? And God said, really? My son too. We have way more in common than we think, right? Before we end, I want to hit on just one more piece of the power of humor, and that's about humor in crisis. You know, I remember last year at the 4th of July, we were at our cabin up in Wisconsin, and we went to the Quick Trip to get some supplies, and of course there's a marquee sign outside the Quick Trip, 4th of July, and it says, liquor and fireworks, and underneath, what could go wrong? A lot could go wrong. But that's true for life too. You know, like when you combine liquor and fireworks and bad things happen, life can tee up some really scary, dangerous stuff. And we've all been through it. You know, it could be a financial issue, it could be a divorce, it could be an illness or depression or anxiety. I mean, I myself am a breast cancer survivor. And in that place of pain, I will tell you right now, humor was the best tool I had. For example, humor is known through scientific studies to be a physical healer. The intake of air, when you laugh, actually drops blood pressure, increases and boosts the immune system, boosts heart and lung function, and even boosts our mood through raising our endorphins. I mean, I remember the day I was going into surgery, I was so frightened, and the anesthesiologist came in, hilarious guy, and he sees I'm scared. He points at the IV bottle and he says, "This stuff, don't worry, this is a great vintage." Scary that he would read into a Baptist minister that she liked her wine. Well, there it is. But I started laughing, went under. And interestingly, I read later that that extra oxygen going under can help recovery on the other side. It's a physical healer. It's also a psychological healer. I mean, laughter can help us through grief, which doesn't seem to make logical sense on its face, but anybody who's gone to a funeral and seen that laughter come up knows what I'm talking about. My first funeral was in Staten Island for a woman in our congregation named Mary, who was just beautiful. She was like 97, never would leave the house without perfect hair and makeup. I'm laughing because this story, not because we lost Mary, but so I go down to Staten Island. I'm very nervous. This is my first funeral. And I go in, it's open casket, the funeral home's packed. And her daughter, Nancy, who's 78 at the time, comes in and says, "Would you say a prayer over Mother?" I'm like, "Of course." So I put my arm around Nancy. I put my hand in the casket on Mary's arm. And the second I touched her arm, I was like, "Oh!" Which is not a pastoral thing to do at a funeral. Nancy turns to me and goes, "What is wrong with you?" And I'm like, "Your mother's arm is square." She had this horrified look on her face for a split second and then burst out laughing. And she goes, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, Mama was scared they wouldn't have her hair color on the other side, so we buried her with Miss Clairol," pulls out the box, "Miss Clairol 5A1C3. I'm laughing, Nancy's laughing, the whole place breaks out laughing, except, of course, the funeral director, who's horrified in the back. Tears running down her face, laughing, laughing, laughing. And then all of a sudden, those tears of joy morph into tears of sadness for losing this beautiful woman. And we mourn, and then all of a sudden somebody tells another funny story about Mary, and we start laughing with tears of joy, and there was this seamless morphing between the stories and a linking of grief through laughter. I have to be honest with you, the person that I learned the most about laughter from is my dad, Herb. We'll circle back to Herb. We lost Herb about 10 years ago, and I remember sitting in the room with him the day before he died, and he was in and out of consciousness. He was 89 years old, going through some really awful medical stuff, and a nurse walks in, and she's about, 12 years old, and she's got kind of a Britney Spears thing happening, and she said, "Mr. Sparks," and a miracle happened. I looked over at my dad. He sits up. His eyes are open. He starts fixing his pajamas. The next thing you know, he had like 2 hairs left, one here and one here. He's fixing those. I'm like, "Hello, family, been here all day." So Brittany kind of sashays over and she goes, "I won't stay long, Mr. Sparks. I just need to check your catheter." I'm the daughter. I'm going to leave. So as I'm walking out the door, I hear my dad take a deep breath and in a thick Southern accent say, "Well, honey, you just make yourself to home." "Oh, Dad, no. So embarrassing." And of course, that story got told at the memorial and the wake, and then at Thanksgiving, and then at Christmas, and then the next year, and the next year, and on and on and on. It's taken me a long time not to hear it and cringe, until a couple years ago, I started seeing the power in that story. And if you think about it, Herb, like all of us, we are all going to find ourselves in a place of pain. And like him, we have two choices of what to do. We can stay in that place of pain and negativity and anger and resentment, and we can take everyone around us down with us, or we can find a little something to smile about in that place of pain. A little something to be grateful for, something to laugh at, something to embarrass your daughter about in the hospital. And what does that do? That takes your heart, lifts it up, and then brings everyone around you up with you. It's that simple. It's about legacy. It's about how we choose to live the life we've been given. I'll leave you with this last story. While most ministers go to retreats or, study, or go away to Bible seminary or Bible camp, in their spare time, 2 or 3 years ago, I went to clown camp. Again, as one does, but I found it to be a really powerful experience. One of the presentations I went to was done by a pediatric hospice clown. Angel. Absolute angel. And she told this story. This clown's name was Shooby Dooby, but she goes by Shoo. And she told the story of meeting a little girl named Beth, who was about 7, very late stages of leukemia. And Shoo said, I walked into her room. I always asked permission, and Beth waved me in. And she said, I went in and sat with her, played for a while, and then Beth pointed at my nose and said, why do you wear that? And Shoo said, well, I'm a clown. That's why I wear a nose. That's how God made me. I'm a clown. I wear a big red nose. Long silence. And then Beth asked the very tough question. She said, what's going to happen to me when I die? And Shoo said, I just immediately said, well, you're going to go to heaven. At which point Beth said, well, where are you going? Which is a fair question with this woman with big orange hair and giant shoes and a loud outfit. And Shoo said, I had to think really fast, and all of a sudden I said, well, I'm going to clown heaven. And Beth just lit up and said, where is that? I want to go there. And Shoo said, well, do you know how if you take a balloon and you let it go and it kind of floats up into the sky and disappears, it goes to clown heaven. That's where it is. And Beth says, that's where I want to go. How do I get there? And Shoo said, I thought for a second, and then I reached in my bag. I had an extra red nose, and I put it on her, and I said, it's easy, Beth. All you have to do is go out with your nose on. Well, of course, a couple of weeks later, she got the bad news that Beth had passed away, but the nurse who called said, Shoo, you should know that she went out with her nose on. Of course, all of us are like, look, we're just crying and crying. It's like such a kind of gut-wrenching story, but then in a way, it's just so full of joy and hope, And I was thinking to myself, isn't that life? Like, we're all born with the nose, like the great, unique gifts that God has given us. We are born with that nose, and the whole point of this life is to live those gifts fully with joy and hope and laughter, right? To go out with our nose on. I mean, just imagine. Imagine, what if tonight we all committed to bringing laughter into all aspects of our lives and into this broken world? I mean, imagine, what if we committed tonight to bringing laughter into our families, into our homes, into our communities, into our workplaces, our corporations, our boardrooms, our hospitals, into all aspects of life? Maybe, just maybe, we might find that our perspectives about ourselves and others begins to shift. Maybe, just maybe, we would find a new source of courage to help us lean into those times of crisis. Maybe, just maybe, we might find a bit more forgiveness for ourselves and for others. I mean, maybe, just maybe, if we committed tonight to bringing laughter into this broken world, then we together as brothers and sisters might laugh our way to grace. Imagine that. I am so glad that we have this time together tonight. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the Biennial, and I wish you many, many blessings.